Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Today we are discussing a micro edition of 8 pieces from Ulysse Nardin based on the Freak Cruiser that debuted in 2013. This is the Freak Cruiser Green, 45 millimeters in diameter in rose gold. The watch measures 13.4 millimeters thick and from lug tip to lug tip 54 millimeters with a 23 millimeter spacing between the lugs. The Freak Cruiser was a big step forward for Ulysse Nardin's most recognizable watch because it was, in addition to technologically advanced and aesthetically provocative, the first Freak that was water resistant to any degree. Previously, the center pivot of the carousel actually protruded through the crystal, whereas here you have a full, solid, unperforated crystal over a dial, endowing the watch with 30 meters of water resistance, which again, compared to 0, is quite a step forward. Now, the watch is large, and you can see on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, it wears nicely, but it wears large. I would say that realistically, I'm sort of a borderline case. The further away from the wrist you get, the better it looks, but I would say if you want to wear this with absolute confidence and no questions, 17 centimeter circumference wrist and up. That said, take a look at the flank of this watch. That is a rather admirably flat, low, and sloped case flank, so this will fit underneath a cuff. Taking a look at the case itself, it has large, full flowing lugs and a fully integrated strap profile, so there's no gap between them, but that also means that because the strap can't pivot against the side of the case, there's a little bit of flare there, so the curvature of the case continues out, virtually extended by the stiffness of the strap. But the strap is beautiful. It is an edition-specific strap, which is a wonderful and rarely seen thing. Bolstered at its end, it has some stuffing to add volume. Suede green, we have a sort of copper-toned stitch to match the rose gold. On the bottom, you can see green calfskin, no crimping, no gouging, a brand new Ulysse Nardin by way of Jean Rousseau strap. And you will note that JR perfectly matched the Ulysse Nardin profiling, so this would cinch to the case. Taking a look at the clasp itself, we have a rather spare, full rose gold, double folding clasp that includes spring-loaded ceramic pin snaps inside, so over time, that tolerance will always remain snappy. The gold cannot wear down the pin snap. That's the advantage of ceramic. The swing arms of the opposite side act as springs for the twin trigger release system, which ensures this will not open until you absolutely want it to. You must press both sides to release. Rolling back to the case, full polish, and you can see, I'll remove my surly fingerprints here. We have individual numbering in the profile because historically Ulysse Nardin's famous navigation clocks, its marine chronometers, would have a screw-fixed individual number plate on the flank, and so that's exactly what we have right here. Now the case back as well as the bezel feature a serration motif that's wave-inspired. Again, nautical imagery is the controlling thought here. Every Freak after the first featured this unique locking system. When I pull it up, I'm able to move the bezel, which sets the time. The original Freak did not have that, so the bezel would frequently be displaced by accident. When I push this down, the bezel is now locked in place. So this is our setting mode, and we have that little wave-like serration outboard so we can more easily grip this bezel. How does it tell time? Very simple. The carousel, which is a mobile carriage featuring the entire movement, everything save the power source, that is your minute hand, and then underneath that we have an hour hand, and you can see as one moves, let me turn the lock back, but as one moves quickly, the other moves slowly. And so this is how you set the time. It is now 3 o'clock. So lock that all back in place. You may be surprised that it is a fairly well-loomed watch. And then we have the green dial base, which is what really defines this special edition. Taking a look, you can see it's been satin brushed in circular concentric fashion. We have blackened screws fixing the Ulysse Nardin nameplate. And then you could see that there is actually a sapphire featuring the numerals that floats over the base. Now the movement, this is Ulysse Nardin caliber UN-205, and it carries over all of the essential elements of the original Freak, save for one. The original Freak did not feature a indirect escapement. So this is a double indirect. The original Freak was built with what was then called the dual direct movement. And like the Breguet natural escapement, there was no lever of any kind, and the wheels each indexed or impulsed the balance in one direction of travel. Well, the dual Ulysse on the Freak 1.5 was a running change to the original Freak to make it more reliable. And what we wound up with is something that you've recently seen on the Rolex Land Dweller, which is two wheels that operate an alternator, and they index that little alternator, which acts as a stubby Swiss lever. So the lever only impulses the balance in the direction of travel, but it is impulsed by a wheel, so it is not a direct impulse system, but it is a double indirect impulse system. And one of the advantages, in addition to less friction inherently because of the materials used, there is no lubrication involved in this all-silicon escapement. And by the way, Ulysse Nardin makes its silicon in-house through its Sigatech subsidiary. So you reduce the friction, you reduce the mass, you reduce the impact of magnetism, and you improve the efficiency overall. This is a free-sprung balance with a full dual-anchored balance bridge. There's an anchor on each side. The screw and the screw, meaning this is a bridge, not a balance cock, beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour. The free-sprung architecture, meaning all of the adjustments are done by moving the screws on the balance in and out to change its polar moment. And you can see the hairspring here is silicon, so it's a silicon anti-magnetic hairspring. I believe that is another feature the original Freak did not have. I believe on the original Freak it was a exercise in silicon escapement construction, and the hairspring was still metal. Now you can see that this is a carousel. So the difference between a carousel and a tourbillon is that a tourbillon has one drive source or one powertrain, both for operating the escapement and rotating the carriage. As a result, if you tried to do this with a tourbillon and physically move it while it is operating, you would crash the escapement. On a carousel invented by Bonnebaniksen, a Dane, back in, I believe, the 1890s, he wanted to create something that had the same rotating carriage trait of a tourbillon, but with greater durability, and the carousel was the solution. And so that's what we have right here. It's sometimes known as a carousel tourbillon because of the many similarities between the two systems. You could see that the decoration on the carousel assembly is second to none. Beveling, black polish, set nation, it is all there and in abundance. When you turn it over, you realize how all of this works. There is a case-back winding mechanism, and you wind by turning the case back. 7 days of power reserve, and you can see the mainspring inside through this little viewport begins to coil, and as you become more familiar with the watch, you will begin to recognize what degree of coiled mainspring corresponds to how much power reserve remaining. And so you wind it using the case back and you set it using the bezel, and there is no conventional crown. So if you love this watch, and it's not hard to love a Freak, you could get one of the most unusual and exclusive versions of perhaps the most important watch line of the modern era. The original 2001 Freak was so far ahead of its time in terms of materials, aesthetics, power reserve. It was, in many ways, the watch of the entire modern era, and this is perhaps its rarest descendant. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.